The Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. My name is Brian Schwabe, board certified sports physical therapist, entrepreneur, and co-founder of the Student Physical Therapist. I worked with elite athletes for over a decade and currently serve as the director of IO Sports Therapy, working side by side with high performance coaches, NFL and NBA skills trainers, and sports agents on a daily basis. I'm also an author, sports medicine consultant, course creator, speaker, and concierge sports therapist, traveling with professional athletes and celebrities. I created this podcast to share my experience as a sports physical therapist and entrepreneur so that I could give you everything you need to know to cash in on your passions, monetize your expertise, and create your own career Super Bowl. With that in mind, welcome to the podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about getting paid to travel with clients as a sports physical therapist. Now, I've been doing concierge house calls for the last 7 years, but only over the last 2 years have I started to travel out of state with clients. And I'll start by saying this. I believe traveling with athletes, entertainers, and executives as an expert physical therapist will become more common over the next decade. In today's podcast episode, I'm going to tell you about my experiences traveling with clients and what you need to do to be ready if the same opportunities happen for you. So let's start this podcast off by me telling you a little bit about 3 different experiences that I had getting paid to travel with clients. I want to preface this, though, by starting off and saying that every single opportunity that I've gone through with the travel assignments has been contracted through IO Sports Therapy, where I serve as the clinic director. Now, there's 4 primary things that you need to be aware of when you're thinking about traveling out of state with clients. Those 4 things include coordinating equipment, coordinating a place to work with that particular client, coordinating gyms or field if they're an athlete, and coordinating times to work with them. So let's dive a little bit into that first so that you have an understanding of some of the primary things that you really should understand when you're trying to, think about that next step as you get an opportunity to travel with a client out of state. So the coordinating equipment part, right? So there's things that you can bring with you when you're traveling with clients. Massage table, physio table, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most important, but it's also probably the most complicated thing to travel with. And what I mean by that is I've discovered that traveling with tables is kind of a pain because they're considered bulk items when you're trying to check them. So they do charge a pretty hefty fee. Now, there are smaller tables that you can take, and there's some chiropractor tables, and there's some travel tables that are a little easier, but for the most part, they're a little difficult to travel with. Like I said earlier, they're considered a bulk item a lot of times with different airlines, and some airlines just don't even flat out let you travel with them depending on how big your table is. So you got a couple options here. The first option is if you're going to a particular city and you know where you're going ahead of time, you could ship a table out there and send it right to the hotel. And I've done that before, and it works a little bit better. We did that when we went to the NFL Combine. It worked very well, but we knew we were going to be there for a full week. So it's a little different in those cases. However, you got to ship it back, and you got to deal with that. So there is some headache with it as well. But again, if you're going to be there for an extended period of time, that might be a better option. Now, if you're going to be in a city just for a day, that doesn't really work. So you got to bring some type of table. However, there are options at certain hotels where they can have tables on hand for you. You can use, a mock table where you're kind of putting together different couches, things like that. Like, there's options for you. But for the most part, I haven't found one really good table that it's easy to travel with yet. I'm about to try a new table called Nubis Pro. So if I have some success with that, it's supposed to be a lot easier to deal with. It's an overseas product, but if it ends up working out, I'll let you guys know about that. Now, other tools that you want to think about bringing equipment-wise, maybe resistance bands, maybe some type of weights, EMR supplies if you're going to be on the field and you might need to work as an emergency medical responder. You just want to be prepared for that, which I always think is smart to do. And then even like manual therapy tools, right? Whether it's tools, whether it's using your hands, whether it's free up, things like that. Those are things you want to make sure that you're thinking about ahead of time. Now, the second one, as far as coordinating a place to work with that particular client, well, that's going to depend on the client you're traveling with and the places that you're going to, right? So all my experiences have been going to different hotels, traveling. So, in those cases, you can either use a hotel room if you have the size for it. Maybe it's a suite, so you have a little bit more room. You could coordinate a conference room if you call the hotel ahead of time. Sometimes you need to pay for that. Sometimes, if it's a small, little hotel and it's completely empty or it's not being used, they will let you use it sometimes. So those are options as well. So you really need to think about that ahead of time and start coordinating those things by calling ahead to the hotel to figure out what the best situation would be. Now, the third one, coordinating gyms or fields, well, that's going to depend on the particular client. So if you're traveling with an athlete and you need to get to a basketball court, if you need to get to a field, typically I would say look around the area that you're going to be first and then figure out, okay, is there a high school nearby? Is there a college nearby? Is there a community college, which is a little bit easier? Is there recreational fields? And then start making phone calls unless somebody's doing that for you. A lot of times I've had managers or agencies help me with that and set that up. Other times I've had to actually, literally reach out to different entities to figure out, is this possible? Can we rent it out? Coming up with numbers, things like that. And then fourth is coordinating times, right? And that one can be a little tricky because schedules can constantly change depending on who you're traveling with. But you want to have a general idea of coordination for times, just especially when you're getting there the first day and when you're leaving the last day, because you're going to have to try to work around that time where you're, getting into town or when they're getting into town and when you're leaving or when they're leaving so that you can maximize that time. Because again, you're getting paid by the day, not by the hour. So you want to make sure that you're trying to maximize that time to give as much value as possible to that particular client you're traveling with. So those are really the four primary things that you want to think about and be aware of when you're traveling with a client so you can start to prep ahead of time. Now let's dive into the three different experiences that I've had that I feel like will give you a good understanding of what it's like to actually travel with clients, but also different experiences so that it can hopefully help you understand what you might need to think about or make decisions on in the future if you have an opportunity like this. So the first one I'll bring up is the NBA Combine. So I went with a player that was preparing for the NBA draft about 2 years ago. And that particular NBA Combine player was looking to get drafted, but also was aware that he would have workouts after the NBA Combine period. So we were really prepping for not only the week at the NBA Combine, but also subsequent workouts after the fact. And that's where I came into play because this particular individual was coming off an injury pretty early on in his particular Combine process, unfortunately. And we had rehabbed him through to performance. He was working directly with our performance staff, still getting rehab to kind of, supplement the two and really make sure that he was firing on all cylinders. But he was still working his way back to that end stage of performance. And he really wanted to give himself every opportunity possible to really have a good showing. So you would get either more workouts or just really increase his draft stock. So, it became a thing where about a week before, his handler and his agency, talked to me about it. He talked to me about it, about potentially going to Chicago with him so that I could help him with the post recovery days, things like that, and just getting him prepped for the next day because the NBA Combine is pretty intensive for a week. You basically go through drills the first couple days, and then you have 5v5 games in the next 2 days. And then there's interviews in between, and then again, immediately you'll go into workouts probably afterwards. And if you do your pro day, which most of the guys did that year at the Combine, the final day, then you really got to prep for a full week and then some. So the idea with me going with him was, hey, when he's there, every single night, work on him, do some soft tissue recovery work, do some assisted stretching, kind of just make sure that he recovers the best he can and he has his body firing on all cylinders. And also just being aware of his previous injury he was coming off of to make sure that doesn't get worse and it kind of stays at bay. So that was the idea with that particular travel assignment. And really what I would say about that is, it came down to a couple things, right? Coming into Chicago, I had my flights coordinated for me by the manager and I had my hotel room coordinated. So those two things were already taken care of. Now I will tell you that oftentimes with travel assignments, you're not going to know until usually about the day before all that information. So it's your job to continuously communicate with the liaison, the manager, the agency, the player, whoever it is that is in charge of taking care of those things so that you get exactly what you need and you have an understanding. But you also need to know that you need to be flexible with those things so that, you can give them some time to work as well. So that was coordinated from a, place to work and from a place to stay, right? So we did all of our work in the hotel room. Now, as far as the table goes, right? I mentioned these four primary things. The table wise, since it was Chicago and that was my hometown, it was a little easier for me to be able to get a table because I have physio contacts in Chicago. So I was able to look up my old mentor and reach out to her, and she was able to give me a table for that week, some free up so I didn't have to travel with that, and then any other equipment that I may need. So that was really, really helpful. And that's a unique situation where that was actually available to me. So I took advantage of that. And I was fortunate because, again, that's the biggest headache is the equipment travel, the table, things like that. So from an equipment standpoint, that was coordinated. From a hotel standpoint and, travel assignment, that was taken care of. And I understood that we were just going to do it in the hotel room, which was perfect because they were big hotel rooms. We could lay out the table, we could do things. So that was an opportunity where that was already taken care of. Now, as far as coordinating, gyms to go to and getting some work in, that was a kind of a combination between myself and the liaison for him, where we had to coordinate getting into DePaul at certain times so he could do some workouts, we could do some body work, we could do some prep work, we could just check in on things. And, again, fortunately, I'm familiar with Chicago, so that made my life easier. But again, that's where that last one, coordinating times and schedules, comes into play, because I had to be ready for that, understand the traffic patterns, understand when to be at the gym, when to be at the hotel room, and everything in between. And that's just a communication thing. So understanding, okay, and this is generally what his schedule is going to be day to day. He could be done between these times. Let's be ready for that. And then let's coordinate stuff after that. So we have ideas. So that was one thing that I had to constantly be shifting with, was scheduling for, gym, hotel room, things like that. But I would say for the most part, that was either early in the morning or late at night. Some of it was in the early afternoon, but very little of it was. It was usually in the beginning of the week. It was only the early afternoon because there was only drills. But as the week went on, there was games, and then there was pro day and things like that. So it was mainly work at night afterwards. So again, that was one experience I had, and I had a great time doing it. We were able to accomplish a lot. He was able to get through the entire combine process, all the 5v5 games, all the pro days, all the workouts afterwards. So again, from that aspect, that was a success. And, that was fun, right? That was something that I got to do for a full week, spent the time, did it right. And that was just my experience at the NBA Combine. And the nice thing about that was, typically during the day, you'll have some time, but, understand it's also your job during that time to continuously prepare for when that player might be done with his process. So, I was watching him on television when it was televised. I was able to get into the combine and actually watch some of the 5v5 games as well. I got a badge, so I was able to get in there, which I was fortunate with. So I was able to kind of observe him and pay attention and say, okay, what is he going through? What is he looking like? Preparing things in my head of like things we can work on. And that was, in my eyes, really crucial and added value to that player, because I took that extra time to prepare for that and communicate with him that I was doing everything in my power to help him, because in my eyes, I was on the entire time. Even if I was off during that time physically, I had to mentally keep doing as much as possible. So that was the first experience. Now, the second experience was a completely different experience, and I'll get into that next. So that experience, the second experience, was a unique environment where I was traveling with an entertainer to Las Vegas for part of his tour. Now, this is a particular individual I've worked with for a long period of time. And, this was more of a wellness, concierge work where you're just getting the body right, keeping injuries at bay, making sure that he's feeling really good, prepared, and just getting as much recovery in between as possible. So the nice thing about that particular experience was most of the things that I mentioned earlier that need to be coordinated were coordinated ahead of time. So in this particular case, the manager was the one that was coordinating everything from hotel rooms and coordinating times and equipment. So in Vegas, we didn't have to get a table. They had a table, ready to go in the hotel, and just brought up to a suite. They had any type of equipment I would need at any moment that could be brought to the room, right? So from that aspect, my life was really easy. But also from a traveling aspect, right, I could bring as much as I wanted because we flew by private jet. So not only was that a unique experience because I'd never done that, right, but it also allowed me to understand that, like, I can literally bring anything and I'm not going to have to worry about bulk items, things like that. And I can, be really, really prepared if I need to be bringing certain things on the plane, because you can bring anything you want on that. So that was a unique experience, and that made my life a lot easier because I had unlimited access to equipment. So, from that aspect, easily taken care of from a coordination standpoint. The way that looked in that particular case was working with that client, pre-show warm-ups, similar to pro athletes, right? So you're increasing blood flow, getting muscle recruitment, going through movement prep that we would typically be going through, things that particular entertainer is going to be doing on stage, but not doing so much that it's going to limit or going to fatigue him and limit him when he's getting on stage, right? And that's the key is when you're in this hybrid role of being a physio but also performance, you have to be able to understand who your client is and make sure that you're not blowing them out before they're doing what they have to do. So that was a pre-show thing that we did. And then post-show, we would do more recovery, body work, assisted mobility, making sure the hydration was right, and just making sure that the next day that person would be as fresh as possible. And, that was fun too, right? So from that aspect, I had a great time doing that because that was really easy from a coordination standpoint. The schedule was unique because during the day, that's the time to sleep, but during the nighttime, that's the show time. So during the day, I was pretty free. And then starting around 5 o'clock to about 3 in the morning is when I would be working, right? So, from that aspect, that's definitely a different travel assignment. There's not as much where I can, watch during the day like I did with the first particular travel assignment that I talked to you about, when I'm watching the NBA player practice and things like that. This particular case, I'm watching the show, but I've already done all my work. So during the day, I kind of have some free time. So that one was, again, fun, exciting, really valuable for that client, and allowed that person to continuously just push that wellness, push that, fitness side of things, and just be as prepared as possible. And then the last one I'll talk to you about is another unique situation that's different from those first two that I mentioned. And this is where I was traveling with an NBA prospect who was a free agent, but he was traveling city to city, back to back days for different workouts. And the tough part about that is that the cities were all away from each other. So it was Cleveland, then Houston, then Sacramento. So it was boom, 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 but different cities across the U.S. So that one was probably the hardest one from a coordination standpoint. And this one where I really had to communicate strongly with the liaison at the agency, the player's handler, and then also the player, because, that player is working out for that team during the day, and then boom, I'm going there at night and I'm working with that particular individual. And then, hey, we fly out at different flights, we're not on the same flight because teams will pay for that athlete to travel to their workouts, but then he's got to take care of me. So that's where his liaison comes into play to get the hotel rooms, get the flights, all that stuff. And the toughest thing about that was flights are constantly being canceled this year. So this particular year was when I did this last travel assignment, and I had flights that were canceled. So I had to constantly keep rescheduling things and working, with that liaison to get that stuff done. And because we were traveling city to city, it was really hard to travel with a table. And the airlines that I was traveling on wouldn't allow bulk items. So, we called the hotel rooms ahead of time, or the hotels ahead of time, and just got extra long couches, things like that, sofas, so we could make things work. But, this was a particular assignment where I'm working on a particular injury that didn't require as much of that, but also just kind of body work and just making sure that they're prepped and recovery stuff. So I brought Normatex with me. I brought manual therapy tools. We used the hotel gyms. Like, those were things that we could have access to. But it was definitely a little bit harder from a coordination standpoint to get everything done. And that's where, again, you need to be aware of this if you start traveling with athletes, especially if you're going to do back-to-back days. Figuring out each city ahead of time to the best you can is really where you can make the most improvement in making sure that it's a good day for that athlete and you to get some work in. So those are the three primary experiences I've had that I feel like are a little bit different from each other, but also hopefully can give you a little bit of an understanding on what that actually looks like to travel with a client. But let's talk a little bit now about, what are the keys to making that successful and landing a gig like that, because as you can tell, those are unique experiences, but they're also really fun and they're different. And, I think that, again, like I said earlier, I think we're starting to see a lot more physios that are experts in their field start to do that more and more and get paid for it. So there's 4 keys in my eyes that will help you be successful at that and land that at the same time. I think number one, you got to be a hybrid, meaning that you got to have some type of hybrid, whether it's physio work plus performance work, physio work plus like just pure manual work, maybe performance and emergency medical responder work, whatever your niche is, where you can serve that particular client at the highest level and you can save them some time and give them some really high value, then that's probably the most important thing. And that goes into key number two, which I think is demonstrating very high value for what they need and what they want. So that's really important to understand. They're going to want certain things that are going to make their life better, easier, or more manageable, right? Depending on the type of client, whether it's an executive, an entertainer, or an athlete, right? Those are the ones that are going to understand what they kind of need and want. And hopefully you've worked with them at enough at that point where you guys can have that conversation. And, I think that's where if you can demonstrate such a high value, then it's worth it to them. And then the third key I would say is, you save them time and, it gives them some trust. So saving them time instead of them having to search for random practitioners or even, a recommended practitioner in a different city, because they're not going to trust them. They're not going to know how to like handle that. And it makes their life a little bit more complicated because now they got to negotiate price. Now they got to, make sure that the person is available. They don't know how they're going to react to them. Like there's too many unknowns. So if you have a really good relationship, good trust with a particular client, well, now by you being able to go with them, you're adding some value, you're adding the trust factor, and they don't have to waste time, which is so important for them. And then I'd say the fourth key is just you really got to understand your numbers, right? What I mean by that is, when I'm out of the clinic, I have to know, and I do know what my numbers are every single day. What is the cost per day for me to leave the clinic? And it's not just as simple as what do I need to make that day for us to be profitable, or what am I losing that day from not being in the clinic? It's what are all the leads that I'm missing out on? What are all the other responsibilities that I won't be able to do? As clinic director, I am responsible for my staff, for the clinic health, for any leads, for businesses, for speaking with the agents, speaking with other practitioners, speaking with other doctors. Like these are all things I'm missing out on. So I have to put that cost into, me leaving the clinic, right? And then on top of it, I want to make sure also that I understand, okay, is my travel being paid for? Do I have to pay for that? Because as a business, to be business savvy, you have to understand that you can deduct certain things as a business owner or from the business itself, right? So you can take the per diem in certain cities, you can, write off your travel, things like that, food, all that good stuff. But how are you building that in? Are you going to take those things as a deduction and not charge for them? I charge for them personally. I think that you can kind of charge for them, and then you can either take the per diem if that was higher, or you can take what you made, right, and offset it. So there's things you need to consider when you're negotiating numbers, and if you don't know your numbers, you're not going to get that right if you have an opportunity to travel. So again, those are the four keys I think are most important when you're trying to travel with clients as a performance physio. Now, just as a wrap up for this episode, right? We've talked about a few different experiences I've had, but we've talked about the four primary things. Let's go back to that just for a second. Remember, coordinating equipment is probably most important. Coordinating a place to work, whether it's hotel room, whether it's conference room, etc. Coordinating fields, gyms, whatever that particular athlete might need. Coordinating times and schedules, which is very difficult to do as well. You need to be flexible. And then again, the keys to being successful with this, you got to be a hybrid, whether it's performance and physio, whether it's manual therapy and physio, whatever it may be. Demonstrating high value for their needs and wants, not what you think, what their needs and wants are. And then the third one is saving them time instead of them searching for random practitioners. And then finally, you got to know your numbers. Understand your numbers, negotiate well so that you have a really good bottom line, and also so that everyone wins, right? You have to be able to handle what you're going to be leaving, and making sure that you're getting what you need as well, so that you can help them and do the best job for that particular client. So that's a wrap for episode 4 of the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. Listen, you guys, if you like this podcast, if you like this episode, please give me a review. Subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and then even our TSPT YouTube page, right? We put these out on YouTube as well, in addition to our podcast. And, we look for feedback. So if you have feedback, email us, direct message us on our TSPT Instagram, and just reach out with other things that you guys want to hear about for these business-minded sports physio podcasts. We'll see you guys next episode.